You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your health care? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your health care, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your health care while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, our family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
My name is Jessie. I'm a United States Special Forces widow. This gives me a unique perspective on the world around us. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you how I see it, and I won't pull any punches. This is my POV, which stands for Point of View.
All right, this is Jessie. How y'all doing out there today? You know, I miss you when we're not talking. Now, don't give me that. Don't even give me that look. Besides, I'm not alone tonight. I got somebody to talk with. I've got one of my favorite all-time recurring guests, Justin Kinney. How you doing tonight, Justin?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Oh, anytime. You are a blast to have on. I think you're one of the few other people I know who I can send you a text and ask you what, and you know what's going on almost as much as I do, if not more on occasion.
Oh, I don't know about that, but it's definitely an interesting time to be following the news.
Oh, yeah. So, I know what the big event is this week. And it's the UN General Assembly, which means one thing and one thing only. There's a lot of rhetoric flying around.
There definitely is.
Some days I'm just like, can people just say what they mean and stop sugarcoating it? But of course these are diplomats and leaders of the world. They're going to spin it, sugarcoat it. And it's just like, the truth is always somewhere in there.
They wouldn't be diplomats and politicians if they didn't put some sort of spin on it.
So what's been your favorite piece of spin so far?
Oh, I don't even know where to go with that. I guess obviously I'm American, so I kind of focused heavily on Trump's speech. I've kind of enjoyed hearing some of the reactions to it. But both the speech and the reactions, actually. I thought it was very interesting. Very little of what he said is like brand new. I mean, even Obama, we'll talk about North Korea in a minute, but even Obama gave some of these ultimatums, but it was kind of more the way that Trump spoke. It was probably one of the more direct and, I don't know how to say that. It was a very direct speech. There was very little wiggle room in his words for interpretation, and I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, I've enjoyed. Well, maybe enjoyed's not the right word. I found it very interesting to see all the various reactions from other countries, from people in this country as well, other politicians and pundits. I've just found that all very intriguing.
Oh, I've had no shortage of fascination with it this week either. It certainly means there's no shortage of audio clips, but I don't have time to air them all. I collect a few and put it together later. In fact, I'm thinking of doing a best of clips for the UN as one episode. Just me introducing the clip, play clip. Me introducing the clip, play clip. Do 4 or 5 clips from the different leaders I found most interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an interesting show. And
yeah, it would be.
Trump really did not leave any wiggle room. And
like I said, he's not a politician. He's been a businessman his whole life, and I think that kind of shows in the way he speaks. It's very, very direct and to the point.
I know. And one of my favorite lines, which didn't get as much airplay as I would have liked, had to have been this one.
This wealth, which rightly belongs to Iran's people, also goes to shore up Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship, fuel Yemen's civil war, and undermine peace throughout the entire Middle East. We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program.
I mean, and he nailed it. Iran is funneling money to terrorism, propping up Bashar al-Assad, and I believe, although I haven't been able to nail down as many details as I would have liked, that some of that cash Obama sent into Iran on a plane ended up in North Korea to fund their nuclear program and missile development.
Who knows? I mean, we do know they've had a relationship for a while. It's obviously hard to track, a pallet of cash, but those two countries have had a relationship for quite some time now. So it wouldn't surprise me if that relationship is still thriving.
I know it's still thriving. I believe it or not, I occasionally find myself trolling the North Korean news site KCNA of all things. My weekly dose of insufferable propaganda, Justin.
That's a state news agency. It's certainly interesting, to say the least.
Oh yes, I mean, Justin, you know a lot about psychology. How do you unbrainwash an entire nation?
Oh, that's... I don't know any psychologist who will tell you that they could actually manage that. It's going to be a real issue if, the Kim family ever gets overthrown, is how do you introduce that population to the world, to globalization and to all these other things. Removing that brainwashing is going to be really, really difficult. You have to be a very slow process, very long process, and just kind of bit by bit, I guess. Honestly, it's probably going to be a multi-generational thing. When you've grown up under a regime like that, where there's virtually no contact with the outside world, and all the information you get comes from the state. I mean, you don't know any better. You don't know anything else, and that's, again, from a psychological perspective, that's just going to be very, very hard to break. And it might even be impossible in a lot of cases, at least in that first generation post, Kim family, if that ever happens.
Now, I've got to say, we forgot to tell much about you, so why don't you sum up your background for the listeners who are going, and why can he say that?
Oh, sure. So my initial bachelor's degree was in psychology. But I have a master's degree in forensics, where I did a lot of criminal, like crime scene investigation, criminal psychology, serial killers, that sort of thing. And then I'm currently, I'm getting close to finishing up a PhD, my doctorate in international relations, where my area of expertise is terrorism, particularly radicalization and recruitment.
Okay, so you've studied the worst of people.
I do. I mean, I've kind of bounced around a little bit, but it all kind of circles around the same question of why do people do bad things? And so I look at a lot of the psychology behind that. And obviously, the goal is to be able to counter it. But pretty much all of my work has been circled around that one central question of why do we see evil in the world? Why do people do bad things? Why do these bad people exist? And why are they doing what they do?
Right.
And hopefully that will lead to ideas of how to stop them.
And we've discussed some of the whys on previous episodes, but
we have. Yeah.
I know why politicians and diplomats spin everything. It's the nature of the beast.
It really is. I mean, it's reached a point, especially in this country, where it almost seems like an honest, straightforward politician has no chance of winning. They always have to have some sort of spin they're putting on things. And it's gotten pretty ridiculous. It is kind of that nature of the beast.
I think that, and not to get into the weeds on U.S. politics here, but I think that's actually why so many Americans found Trump refreshing. He wasn't politically correct and didn't spin a lot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, I mean, for all of his various flaws, and even a lot of people on the right, don't like him, but he definitely appealed because of that non-politician perspective that he brought to things. His personality is just very different. He's not somebody who uses a lot of that doublespeak that you often see. And I think, regardless of whether or not you agree with his politics, that was something that appealed to a lot of people.
And there wasn't a lot of doublespeak in that UN speech. Like you said, he left no wiggle room. And
yeah, it was definitely one of the most direct speeches from a U.S. president that I can ever remember.
Now,
it was very, very direct.
The concepts in it weren't new.
Sure, no, of course not. Like I said, I mean, Obama made a lot of very similar statements, particularly about North Korea, but other places as well, in some of his speeches. But the tone of it was different with Trump.
It was, and on that stage, tone matters. Now, it's no surprise that Iran came out, didn't like Trump's speech, and then came out and bashed Israel. That doesn't surprise you, did it?
No, of course not.
I think either one of us could have written that press release. So, I'm going to go over my scorecard real quick for my new listeners. You've got Bashar al-Assad over in Syria. And I'm going to use the sound effect because I don't get enough chance to use his sound effect. Yes, that's a chittering chipmunk, which is how I think Putin sees him. Some little critter to be played with. And he is being propped up by none other than Russia and Iran. And then that leads you to Iran, who is trading partners with North Korea, and like you said, and they do have an established, known trading platform for trading missile and weapons technology and scientific information. So then you get to North Korea, whose big brother is China, and trades with Russia. They are all tied together. So, did Trump essentially call out a new axis of evil without saying it was an axis of evil?
I think a lot of people are interpreting it that way. I don't know that I would go quite that far because, as you said, he didn't actually say that. But he certainly was very pointed in his comments about certain countries, North Korea and Iran in particular. That I think, at least the degree to which he was pointed, I think took a lot of people by surprise, particularly around the world, and we're seeing some of that reaction from other countries too. And I think it's something that needs to be needs to be considered going forward. Is just how seriously he's taking some of these, as he called them, rogue states.
Well, Iran's gone on while they aren't, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Inspectors, Iran is not violating, except they've gone over on their heavy water, which, well, I've discussed that one with Dr. Judy L. Moore. And she said that's really not that big of a deal, and that's generally what the rest of the world says is it's heavy water. It's not the end of the world. They didn't go over on their plutonium.
Right, that's where the really important stuff is.
Right, because for those of you who don't know how a nuclear reactor works, you put in uranium, you get out plutonium. Plutonium makes a bigger bomb. That's the real thumbnail sketch. You want more? Go look up Conversations in Science. There's a whole episode on it. But I'd say they're violating the spirit of the law. There's the spirit of the deal, because they are building weapons factories in Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon.
Well, I think that's partly why there was a lot of pushback against the deal in the first place. Is a lot of people thought it wasn't specific enough and allowed a lot of that little room for interpretation, where it may not be violating the actual written deal, but may be violating the spirit of the law. I think. I think that's partly why there was so much debate initially when Obama was putting it forward.
Well,
I believe that this could actually happen. At least these type of things.
Well, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I don't think that deal is worth the paper it's printed on, because Iran wrote the book on cheating on deals and evading sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're teaching their trading partner, North Korea, how to do the same. And Iran produces oil and can refine their own oil. How do you think they kept planes flying all these years? And cars running all these years? The only thing that grounded a vehicle or an airplane in Iran wasn't a lack of fuel. It was a lack of parts to fix something that broke. And so I'm willing to bet that missing 30% of oil products that Nikki Haley has referenced that the UN Security Council sanctioned will be coming to North Korea, courtesy of Iran. And I have heard...
As you said, that relationship has existed for a long time, so that wouldn't surprise me.
Now, of course, China sends stuff to North Korea via pipeline, so it's also hard to track how much is going through the pipeline.
Right, yeah, you can't really keep an eye on that very easily.
And of course, China's biggest fear is a unified Korea under Seoul.
Yes, particularly because the South Koreans are big allies of the U.S. That would give the U.S. essentially a foothold right on their back door.
Now, I've said on the air that China is using their territorial water claims of the South China Sea as a bargaining chip. Now, it hasn't come out publicly, but I'm willing to speculate that those talks have gone on privately. But I don't think this country is willing to let China thumb its nose at the world and disregard the International Court of Arbitration's ruling that the whole South China Sea doesn't belong to them, despite what they say, and despite their real-world Minecrafting of building islands.
Yeah, I think I would agree, although I would note that this has been going on for a little while, and they haven't really faced much in the way of actual consequences so far. I think there would have to be some sort of consequence, not necessarily from the U.S., but somebody is going to have to step up to them and issue some sort of consequence for them. Otherwise, it's just going to keep happening, and they're not going to give up on the South China Sea stuff.
Somebody just asked Mike in the chat room at KLRNRadio.com just asked a rather intriguing question. And that is that he believes a united Korea will happen unless China annexes North Korea. And he asked if we thought they would.
Yeah, so I've heard that theory before. I think that would be potentially possible. My best guess is what would happen is there would be some sort of other, a continuation of the Korean War, and in the final treaty, China is going to be given a large chunk of North Korea as compensation for not backing the North Koreans and not turning it into some sort of major proxy war of some kind. I think that's not this is not an unlikely outcome for them to end up getting a lot of that territory if a war actually does take place. I think it would have to be after the Kim family has been defeated, though. I don't think they're going to annex them while the Kims are still in power. It would have to be after a war that's deposed the entire North Korean government. But it wouldn't surprise me that ends up being kind of a bargaining chip on the table for China staying out of it. Say we'll give you a large chunk of this territory.
That's an interesting perspective. I don't know that I'd actually ever thought about China annexing North Korea. I mean, yes, borders do change in this day and age, but as we've discussed before, they don't change often or easily. And Mike in chat said, interesting idea, split the difference. So.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you mentioned a second ago that, we don't actually see territorial changes very often anymore. Wars used to be all over territory. Virtually every war, not in the last 100 years or so, but before that, a lot of it was over territory, arguing over borders, and the number of those interstate conflicts has really dropped off, particularly in the last 100 years, and you only see it on a few occasions, and I think that could be one that changes, but it would have to go to war first before they got into how they're going to divide it up the territory afterwards.
It could be definitely an interesting outcome.
Yeah, I don't know how likely it is, but I think it's at least a decent possibility.
And, China doesn't clearly want us on their southern border. And that's why North Korea is their little brother, although sometimes more like redheaded, misbehaving stepchild, that they prop up and they support.
I think that's absolutely. I mean, I don't see them getting much out of this, this partnership with North Korea, other than keeping the U.S., out of their backyard. Beyond that, they don't gain a whole lot from a relationship with, this Kim dictatorship.
No, they don't. Other than, there is one thing they have gained recently, though. And it's been since everybody's been staring at North Korea. And at least in my opinion. North Korea has drawn everybody's attention on the Asia Pacific region, right?
They have, yeah.
So everybody's looking over there. Nobody's paying attention to the South China Sea right now. And that's where China is trying to establish an even stronger foothold.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think they do tend to flourish when when attention is directed elsewhere. I think that's probably true of a lot of places. And so they may be using North Korea in that capacity as well.
And it's one of those things of, you don't know for sure, because personally, I don't know about you, but I cannot get into the head of Kim Jong-un or President Xi Jinping of China, but I'm not sure I want to. But it's one of those things of, China does use North Korea, and yes, it is a buffer. But how much say do they have over the actions of the leadership of North Korea? I mean, the last thing they want is a failed North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, so they could, they could yell and scream and tell them to knock it off, but they're not going to cut off the oil or cut off the trade. And I'm not sure how strongly they're even going to implement the sanctions. although they voted for them. Are they really going to enforce them? China's been a little bit wishy-washy on that.
They have. That's a good point. I think we have seen China move away from North Korea a little bit in recent times, especially with those sanctions kind of being the peak of that, or where they've voted for them, because that really hasn't happened before. That may be sending a signal to Kim that he's overstepping a little bit, and they're trying to rein him back in. But it's a good question as to how much control they actually do have over him, because he does keep the U.S. out of China's backyard in a lot of ways, as long as he doesn't overstep and turn it into a war that the U.S. is going to crush him. So he does have actually some leverage in that relationship, despite being such a small country, in relative comparison to China.
Exactly. And unfortunately, with everything, there is a price. And yes, it is time, Justin. We've got to take that ever wonderful commercial break and pay those radio station bills. So we will see you on the other side.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
Tired of paying outrageous prices for Viagra? Well, we have great news for you. Now you can finally get Viagra at huge discounts. Healthy Man allows you to save up to $500 on Viagra. Why pay U.S. pharmacy prices of $15 per pill or more when you can get Viagra for less than $3 a pill? Call today and get 40 Viagra pills for only $99. This can cost as much as $600 at your local pharmacy. You can't afford not to call us. If you want Viagra at the lowest prices, never pay $15 a pill pharmacy prices again. Get Viagra for less than $3 a pill. Call 1-800-516-7602 today and save up to $500 and get 40 pills for just $99. Healthy Man is fast, easy, and affordable. Operators are waiting at 1-800-516-7602 to take your call right now. Call 1-800-516-7602. That's 1-800-516-7602. Again, 1-800-516-7602.
Attention business owners and independent contractors. This is a money-saving message from Tax Mediation Services. If your business owes $20,000 or more in taxes, we can help you today, right now. Listen, dealing with the IRS is no picnic. It's an intimidating and extremely stressful process, and you don't want to go it alone. Our attorneys know every law, every tax break, and every possible opportunity to help you resolve and reduce your tax debt. And if you owe more than $20,000, you may be at the top of their hit list. So don't take your tax debt lightly, because it will not go away on its own. The IRS can seize your bank accounts, your home, and even shut down your business. Call our tax experts today at 1-800-783-0810 and let us deal with the IRS while you focus on your business. That's 1-800-783-0810. Again, that's 800-783-0810.
thank y'all for hanging in there with us while we paid those radio station bills. And yes, Ron, I did catch your question in the chat room. And just for everyone who's listening and not in chat at klrnradio.com/chat, Ron has asked if there is an ethnic or tribal difference in heritage between China and North Korea. And he feels that China has limited use for North Korea other than a buffer. Justin?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that last part in particular. There is very little utility to China for having North Korea right there. I mean, nobody wants an irrational dictator right on their border. But he provides that buffer. He provides a way to keep the U.S. out of their backyard. I think that's really the bargaining chip that North Korea has in that relationship.
Exactly. I'm not sure. Now, what about the ethnic differences? I'm not sure how much of a difference there is. I know there has to be some, at least culturally, but... Yeah,
so ethnicity isn't an area of expertise for me, but from what I understand, North Korea is actually considered one of the most ethnically homogenous countries in the world. They are Korean. So there is very little in the way of Chinese ethnicity. They're actually closer to Japan in terms of ethnicity. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of common ancestors in that part of the world, but Korea and China, for the most part, are distinct. Like I said, they're closer to the Japanese in terms of ethnicity. That said, being on the border, there actually is a small Chinese community in North Korea as well. But it's still very, very small. I mean, it's something like 99% ethnically Korean.
Right. I'd say they're definitely ethnically closer to South Korean, even though even their language has drifted apart.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're essentially the same ethnically as South Korea. And then the next would be probably Japan before you get to China in terms of that. Actually, I believe there was a study just a couple years ago that came out showing that the Japanese have common ancestors as the Koreans. So they're probably the most closely related foreign country to both Koreas, both North and South.
Right, and it's just one of those things that that's what draws all the calls for reunification is essentially there were families and just ripped apart. And unfortunately, that generation that was actually physically separated is soon going to be no more.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're on the last possible chance for any kind of family meetings. And I don't see it happening in the current, with the tensions on the peninsula the way they are. I mean, the last time I have visited the peninsula, and when I was there, the Kaesong Industrial Complex, which was a joint North-South Korean venture, actually gave me this monicum of hope that maybe things could settle down and they could at least come to a peaceful understanding. But now, it's intense.
It certainly seems unlikely, yeah.
And just as a reminder for all those listening, yes, my husband is active duty Army, and yes, he is stationed in South Korea at this point. So, while I don't want to see us go to war, and no soldier or family of any member of the United States Armed Forces does, I know that he will happily do his job if that's what's asked of him. So, and Ron said, great, thanks for the answer, Justin and Jess. So, anyway, I was wondering if China has said that if if we actually act first, if we're defending ourselves and not acting first, that they won't step in.
Yeah. So I don't think this came straight from the president, but it was another member of the government who basically said, if the North Koreans make the first move, they'll stay out of it and let the U.S. deal with it. But if the U.S. makes the first move, then they'll back the North Koreans. There's something to that effect.
That's essentially. Do you think they'll live up to that? If they see that, even though North Korea made the first move, they have to know we're going to flatten North Korea like a pancake. I mean, I'm sorry, the most common sound in North Korea will be this.
Yeah, I mean, whether or not they live up to that's going to be the real big question. I imagine it will come down to the bargaining table. As you mentioned a few minutes ago, I think what they're going to say is we'll stay out of it as long as you give us this territory, as long as you let us annex this part of the country or something. I think there's going to be some bargaining chip that they're going to demand in exchange for that. So I think there's a good chance they will stay out of it, but only if they get something for doing so. I don't think they're going to let the U.S. just take over that foothold without getting something in return. Whether that's territory or something else, I think they're going to demand more in either scenario. Whoever makes that first move, I think they're going to demand something to stay out of it.
Right. Now, what I'm wondering is if we claim that we are acting first, that we are being defensive because we're defending our ally Japan, because they keep throwing stuff over Japan's head. Now, they are smart enough to keep it out of Japanese, high enough to be outside of the airspace. But all the sirens and the warning signals and everything still blares. Do you think if we go on that basis, they'll stay out of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the international community, there's really seen as like two types of war. There's this preventive war and then the preemptive war that are both considered to be defensive wars, kind of. Preemptive war is when you attack first, but only because you believe that an attack is coming, like imminently. Right. This would be a good example. This would be like the 7-Day War with Israel and Egypt. Right? Israel technically attacked first, but only because Egypt was massing on their border and about to attack. That is usually seen as internationally legal. Now, the other one, preventive war, is when you see the other side building up their military and everything, but there's no evidence that an attack is necessarily imminent. It's just about preventing them from gaining strength. And that's where you'll see most contemporary scholarship claim that it's illegitimate. So that's obviously a spectrum, right? Of how likely do you think an attack is coming, and that makes it very difficult to tell if a war is considered technically legal internationally or what. And so I think kind of where we land on that spectrum may influence how much China wants to get involved. Like I said, this preemptive war, just wanting to be the first one to attack in a war that is coming, and this attack is imminent, and you want to just get that first strike out there. That's usually seen as okay, and so China may be more willing to stay out of something if that was the case.
In other words, if the North Korean troops were all lined up just on the other side of the DMZ, and we can see that via satellite and everything else, and we go in and just go, boom, you think they'll be okay with it?
Well, I still think China is going to demand something to stay out of it, but I think, they don't want some homicidal dictator on their borders either. So I think if they see he's trying to pick a fight with the South Koreans or with the U.S., a fight that he's not going to win, I think at a certain point they're going to realize it's not in their best interest to have a person like that right on their back door either, right on that back step. But at the end of the day, I still think they're going to demand something, regardless of what kind of war it is, whether it's preventive or preemptive, or any other type as well. I think they're going to demand something to stay out of it.
I agree. I really do. Now, I got to mention another comment from the chat room. You had some praise from one of our regular listeners, Mike. He said that you are sharp, and he's having a great time listening to you. And I think he made some
I appreciate that
comment I might have missed about you need to be on more often. I bring him on as often as his schedule allows, Mike. And the next comment is, good answer, Justin. They'll let him hang if it gets too bad, but they'll want something. And Ron said that Kim Jong-un is just nuts enough to launch a first strike. But would his generals let him? Ron, my answer to that is his generals would let him. Otherwise, they'd be dead and replaced.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point, though, about him being nuts enough to launch a strike, because that raises some good questions. While he is, generally considered to be fairly irrational, and he seems to do a lot of things that are crazy, at the end of the day, you do have to wonder, is he nuts enough to essentially commit suicide, which is what he'd be doing if he tried to launch an attack, right? I mean, and he has to understand that if he tried to launch something against the United States or South Korea, his days are numbered. If it's, it's actually be less than days, it'd be hours probably, if even that. So the question is he may be crazy, but is he actually suicidal? And that's a much harder question to answer. There's a lot of scholars out there who think he's really just making a huge bluff, because he'll never actually attack, because he's trying to provoke the U.S. into attacking first, which gets China on his side. But he'll never make the first move because he's not suicidal. I think that those are some good questions we need to ask, because if he's truly suicidal, that changes the equation. But if he's just trying to bluster and bluff his way into more power, he certainly seems to like power a lot. So that, whether he'd be willing to risk that, to pick a fight with the U.S. is a tough question.
Well, another question from the chat room, and first I'm going to respond to what you said. I don't think he's, according to a medical diagnosis, crazy or suicidal. I do think he believes some of his own propaganda, not all of it. But I don't think him doing an intentional first strike. What I see happening that could potentially kick off the war, and we could call it defensive, is one of those rockets that he launches over Japan or launches one over Guam, having a mid-air accident and falling on the country.
It could be. And I think something like that, or even doing that and provoking South Koreans or the Japanese or the U.S. to strike back. He does something little tiny thing like a missile that gets too close to Japan. Somebody fires back, and all of a sudden he's the victim. He can use that to legitimize himself and get China on his side. I think if he's playing for war, I think that's the move he's trying to make, is push it just far enough that somebody else fights back without him actually crossing the line of striking first.
Now,
we see that all the time with terrorist groups. They do that provoking all the time to try to legitimize their cause. He's not quite the same thing as a terrorist group, because he's actually a state, a country. But
okay,
some of that psychology is the same.
Justin, you're talking about a country that's half terrorist, half mafia. At least in my book.
Yeah, there are certainly similarities in terms of the way they run things.
And the other question from the chat room is, do you think China would ever take out Kim Jong-un and the other main players to bring down the regime? I don't think so. They have. I have a feeling they have the ability to do so, but I don't think they'd ever do it.
I would generally agree with that. I think clearly they have the ability. I think the U.S. technically has the ability. I think a lot of countries have the ability to do it, but actually doing it is a different story. I'm not sure China. I don't think China would do that unless they would feel comfortable with whoever would take his place.
Right.
And they would feel comfortable that it wouldn't turn into a war. You know, if they take out the leadership and they don't have somebody ready to go right away, you know, then South Korea might step in and try to take over that territory, or the U.S. might try to step in. The last thing they want to do is create a power vacuum right on their border. I mean, that's what happened in Iraq. You know, right? We took out Saddam Hussein and we didn't get a strong enough leadership in there to take its place, turned into a power vacuum, and ISIS came to power. So I think the last thing that China wants is a power vacuum right on their border.
Exactly.
So while they could take him out, whether or not they actually would is probably a very different question. And I don't know that they would want to do that unless they felt really confident in being able to replace him quickly.
Now, I think this was probably the last comment we're going to have time to actually fully discuss. General Mattis has said there are military options that could be used where North Korea wouldn't be able to turn Seoul into a wasteland, essentially. And Mike in the chat room was asking, could that mean that maybe something is coming to a head after all? Because the latest nuclear test, the 6th one, was a whole new level. And for those who aren't regular listeners to my show, North Korea is already making preparations for a 7th nuclear test. So do you think this is coming to a head?
You know, it's hard to gauge. I think it's certainly getting closer. When we're talking about war and things, there's something called there's a couple things that are designed to like increase the credibility of your threats. You know, North Korea wants something, they're trying to threaten, they need credibility. And so there's a couple different ways that we've seen people do that in the past. You know, one of them in particular that I think we're seeing now is something called brinksmanship, which is a fancy word that essentially means slippery slope. And it's this idea of like taking further and further steps that make that possibility of accidental war more likely, which is, I think, what we're seeing with these missile tests that, you know, are going over Japan. You know, the war might accidentally break out. And what this is communicating is that he is willing to go to war and he's trying to increase his own credibility and his own justification. And he's basically, I think, hoping that the other side, you know, the U.S. or whatever, is going to blink first. I mean, it's kind of like the old, you know, childhood game of playing chicken, where you get closer and closer to it and just hope the other side backs down first. But if you don't, then it could break into war. And so I think that seems to be what's going on right now. And both sides are upping their rhetoric. We're upping, you know, the nuclear test was a big thing. There was the bombing of the island, the joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises recently as well. I think both sides are kind of upping those sorts of things and kind of playing this game of chicken to an extent, hoping one side will back down. I think we are certainly getting closer to that collision.
Well, I have to agree with you. And while I pray that I'm wrong every night, because I don't want to see the results of a war on the peninsula, especially if there's a miscalculation and North Korea is able to hit Seoul, which, for those of you who live under rocks, is the capital of South Korea. And I apologize, I do have a cough drop in my mouth. I have been talking way too much today. Why do you think I had a guest on? Huh? Anyway, besides, I love having Justin on. I digress. I believe that we're right on that cusp. I believe we may actually just be waiting for the timing and for everything to play into our favor. And every time we do a joint South Korean exercise, the North accuses us of rehearsing an invasion. I'm wondering if one of these exercises isn't going to be so much exercise as we're crossing the 38th parallel. We've had it.
That would certainly be the way to go about it. I think if they were to make that decision, try to turn one of those exercises into something more taken by surprise, that would be the way to do it. Again, I'm not convinced that we're quite there yet. I think we're still waiting on something, probably from China, to me personally. It would not surprise me if there's a lot of backroom meetings going on at the UN right now about that, trying to get enough support for something.
I agree.
I absolutely think you're right that we are getting closer and closer to that cusp as both sides seem to be escalating the rhetoric of late.
And you mentioned the recent bombing of the range this past weekend. There were two things that stood out to me in the article, and I know you read the same article because I shot you the link earlier in the week. One, they were dropping live ammunition. Most of the time they're using practice rounds. Two, they mentioned that it had been U.S. fighters, South Korean fighters, and Japanese fighters all involved in drills on the same weekend. I'm wondering if all three were in the skies over the DMZ, but no one's talking about that. But that's my speculation.
Could be. And the fact that all three have gotten involved to an extent is certainly a strong signal to Kim in North Korea that this would not be a one-on-one type fight if something came to it. I think, again, it's kind of you often see this kind of power politics, right, where you're trying to communicate something through military force. And I think that's what we're seeing here is this signaling to North Korea that, hey, there are several countries here that would be on the side of the U.S. We have this force. We're demonstrating it. That'd be the live ammunition, and it's all signaling. And you just have to wonder how Kim is taking that, at least personally. What he thinks is happening.
Exactly. Well, unfortunately, Justin, we are about out of time. So, as I do with every guest, even my favorite, especially my favorite recurring one, why don't you let people know, because you do have some social media, where they can find you when you're not on the air hanging out with me?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me generally two places. I'm on Twitter. You can find me. My handle there is Justin R_Kinney. That's Kinney. And then in addition to that, I have a Facebook page. You can find me there. It's actually under J. Robert Kinney, which is my authoring name. That's what I use when I write books. But you can find my page there as well. In both places you can get news about what I'm doing, both in terms of my writing career as well as anything else that happens to pop out of my head.
And for anyone trying to track me down, whether you missed Justin's information or you just have a question you didn't get a chance to bring up in chat, you can find me on Twitter at Jessie's POV, or you can shoot me an email at the station, Jessie's POV at KLRNRadio.com. And Justin, I gotta say, your book Precipice, it was a fun read.
I appreciate it.
And yes, that's the title of his, was it mystery?
Yes, so it's kind of a mystery suspense novel. It's Precipice on Amazon, both paperback and Kindle. I'm currently working on a second book. I've got an entire draft done. So it's going to take a lot of editing before it's ready for publication, but a second one is on the way.
All right. And you regulars know what's coming? You new listeners, hang on for the ride, because I'm out of here!